I'd like to start off the interview by saying thank you so much, Josh Harrison, for being with me today. So, Josh, can you tell me about Valence Studios and exactly what you do there?
Yeah, so Valence Studios is an indie game studio in upstate New York. We've been around for a little over 5 years now. And what we're trying to do is find these new ways of creating game experiences that people have never played before. So our first title was Mario Kart Live Home Circuit, which we designed in partnership with Nintendo. And in that, you drove a cart around that had a little camera on it. So it was an RC car, a physical car in your living room, and you could create these Mario Kart tracks and like drive around your living room. And the scale of everything really changed the game. It still felt like Mario Kart, it still had all the characters, but in a totally different way than you've ever seen it before. And Knockout City, obviously, totally different from that. I know we're going to get more into Knockout City in the future, but just kind of creating this experience of like, okay, you've played shooters, you've seen shooters before, you've played cooperative games. How can we do something totally different? So that's what Knockout City is. And as far as what I do on the team, I lead marketing for Knockout City. So I've been here for about a year and a half. Have been on marketing for Knockout City since before it was announced, all the way up until now.
That's great. I mean, like the contrast between like your Mario game and then like straight over to Knockout City. What exactly do you think is unique about Knockout City that makes it different from all these first-person shooter games and like all these other indie games?
Yeah, so at its core, Knockout City is about throwing and catching a ball. That's all it is. And there are all of these other trappings that are around it and all of these other elements that make it what it is. But the core gameplay is just throwing balls, catching balls. And in other shooters, they have that like throwing quote unquote element where like, hey, you have a gun, you have something, and you're shooting a projectile at someone else, but you can't catch bullets in other games. Like you either hit someone or you didn't. So this really makes it, this cat and mouse kind of, this rock paper scissors kind of, where it's not just like, did you do what you needed to do at the right time to make something happen? It's also, if you're going to score a hit, did the other person fail to do something for you to get that hit? And in pretty early development, we decided like, hey, this is a game where the physics objects in the air, the dodgeballs in the air, the players that can ball up and become balls themselves, it's too hard to do if you have to free aim everything. Because if you're in a shooter, bullets travel, like super fast. So that makes sense. But if you're throwing a ball, it needs to have travel time. And so with having to lead the ball and in all of that, it didn't feel fun. It wasn't a good experience before we added auto aim. So we said, hey, let's add auto aim. Let's completely change what this plays like. It may look like a shooter, like a third person shooter where you're, behind the player. But because it has auto lock on, it almost in some ways plays more like a fighter, because instead of it being about positioning and aiming, it's now about position and timing, which is also something that not many other games that I know of out there in the kind of like shooter action space have.
Well, yeah, there's clearly like a big difference between the stereotypical like first person shooter like COD, where like you just shoot a bullet, it goes, and then hey, you either hit or you didn't. There's all these different mechanics with Knockout City. Were there any challenges with Knockout City being based off Dodgeball with the mechanics?
Not with the mechanics as much as just like making this a reality. So there are plenty of obviously there are tons of multiplayer games out there, but there's never been another game that's been exactly what we've tried to do. Like, it's not just the number of players that are positioned, and with auto aiming, you don't have to be able to have that super precise aiming, but when you have 8 players moving around a map and all of these physics objects that are moving in real time and players that can become physics objects, as I said, there was no game engine out there that could do what we needed to do. Like, making this game that's so reliant on that precision timing is just, it was a really hard problem to solve. So we needed to make our own game engine just to make this game. Like, we had a prototype working in another engine that worked when we were on like a local LAN connection, but as soon as we tried to do it over the internet, it fell apart. So we basically scrapped the entire game, the code that we had, and said, hey, let's start over, let's make our own engine, let's make it in this engine, and then the rest is history.
So starting over, that was like clearly frustrating for you, wasn't it?
So I wasn't there when it happened. I know it is a really hard thing to do though, because you see it and you're like, okay, I'm sitting 2 feet away from the person that I'm playing with, and this game does feel great. Like there's a core of something good here. Um, but you know, if instead of being 2 feet away, you're 2,000 miles away, that's where it just stops becoming possible. So it is frustrating, but at the same time, you know that like the end goal is to get millions of people to play from all around the world with each other. Everybody can't always be in the same room. So it was something we had to do.
Well, I mean, the gameplay of Knockout City is great, and I do think it is great for like kids to be able to play with other people from all over the world. Like that's clearly something. When you think of stereotypical sports, usually you have to be in like the same area or like the same room or same state. But with
Yeah.
this, you can play with anyone, anywhere, anytime. Speaking about the Knockout City, was it intentional to make it an esports game?
Kind of. We didn't set out, that wasn't like priority one, obviously, but when we started kind of developing this and we did make that switch to it being about positioning and timing, there was this element of this being a game that's like very easy to pick up and play, but very difficult to master. And I think people are still, you know, even a year into the game, still trying to figure out where that skill ceiling is, because as good as you are at reaction time, team play, team positioning, team strategy is something that, you know, potentially has no cap to it. And so once we found out that there was this hidden depth, or potentially not so hidden depth, we did start exploring that and kind of adding to it and adding to it. So, you know, you have dodgeballs that you can throw straight at a player, but hey, now we have all of this geometry, all of this environmental stuff in all of our maps that you can move behind, hide behind. And so we want you to be able to get out of the way of dodgeball, but we want to give something to your opponent so that they can curve a ball around something, throw something, lob a ball over an object. So it's just consistently adding this depth and making it deeper every time is really how we kind of ended up with this game that feels great for esports.
Well, so it was kind of like a hidden treasure thing. Like you didn't notice it at first, but when you started to kind of experiment with it, like in all the mechanics, that's when you started to realize, oh, hey, we can make this into a pretty cool esports game. What is the importance of Scholastic Esports to Knockout City and Valence Studios?
So Scholastic Esports in particular is super interesting because it is a game that is great for all ages. It doesn't have guns, it doesn't have blood, it doesn't have violence. It's a dodgeball game. So you know, while pro esports and college esports and, you know, some high school sports are okay with games that are rated T and up, there's a much more restrictive set of games that like middle schools in particular are looking to bring in. And having games that are not only checking the boxes on what's appropriate for the age group, but also um, cross-platform, cross-progression, that are definitely competitive and have that good reward loop as you're playing, of always feeling like you can get a little bit better every time. There aren't a ton of games out there, so like middle school and high school has been really important to us.
Schools are very strict when it comes to like what video games they're going to allow kids to play. If it's a first person shooter, get it out the door, that's not going to be possible. Like any sort of blood or violence isn't going to be allowed. So you wanted to make a game that everybody could play, like so kids would be able to play like anywhere in high school, like in middle school, without having it be restricted because there's no real like violence or any guns or anything.
Yeah, it wasn't even just about ages in general. It's just inclusion at a really high level is important to us. Like we wanted this game to feel like everybody is welcome, regardless of who you are, you know, regardless of your age or your gender or anything. Like that was in our customizations. We wanted to make sure that all outfits could be worn by either body type. We didn't want to have like male outfits and female outfits. We wanted to have inclusion on that front. We wanted to be able to bring in a bunch of different styles so people all around the world feel like there is an element of what is appealing to them that is represented in the game. And so, you know, being something that players of all ages could enjoy is just kind of a piece of that puzzle.
So were those inclusive changes made based on feedback from the community? When you were first thinking of Knockout City, this is what you wanted to do. You wanted to be inclusive. You wanted everybody to be able to play it from like the get-go, like no matter age, gender, sexuality, like anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it was always from the core. Like we didn't announce this game until it was literally a year ago yesterday that we announced this game. But we've been working on it for like 5 years now. So there was a long period of time before the community could have any input. And so from really early on, as we were developing this art style, it was like, okay, we want this to be something that feels inclusive and welcoming to everybody, no matter who they are.
A lot of video games always gonna have like these restrictions when it comes to either like what body type or like or what kind of hairstyle you can do based on whether you choose boy or girl, all that stuff. Like
Yeah.
a lot of video games don't really take that into consideration. Like how can we be inclusive to like other games? And that's kind of the approach we wanted to do. So in 2020, there was like a huge COVID outbreak. Did Valence Studios have any sort of like difficulties managing through the quarantine?
Yeah, so I started in December of 2020, so I wasn't there during the migration of from being in office to being full-time remote. But just hearing other people talk about it, it was a big change. I mean, it's a really hard thing for any company that is used to working one way, that now all of a sudden has to work a different way. Um, some people could migrate easier than others. Like for I'm in marketing, so I pretty much just work on a laptop. Like I can take that laptop to work, I can take it home, I can take it to my parents' house over the holidays. Like there's all I can take it anywhere. If you're an artist, maybe you have like a tablet that you use for drawing, illustrating, modeling. um, that's one accessory that maybe, hey, okay, migrating this from the office to home is important. But then on the other side, you have people like QA, and so some QA people on our team, they have a dev kit for PS4, for PS5, for Xbox One, for Xbox Series X. They have a beefy gaming PC. They have a low spec gaming PC because we're testing on everything. And so there are some people that ended up needing to find room in their apartments that were never meant to be used for work, to have all of these different items in there. And then just the way that everything was transitioned also, it wasn't like everybody had a 1 month heads up of like, okay, let's plan this over the next month. It was like at some point the studio just realized like, oh, this is really serious. Everybody work from home starting tomorrow. We'll figure out how to get equipment out to everybody soon.
So you weren't as affected as much as like other people in your office were.
No, but it was something that I know our leadership was surprised at how well we did adapt to it. There's always that question about like, are we going to be able to do our work at all? And of course we were. I mean, it took some work, it took some adjusting, it took figuring out new processes, and figuring out how we were going to do things. But the work got done, and we kept making games.
One final question. What exactly made you want to do dodgeball as the main idea, the main sport of the game?
So it didn't actually start out as like, let's make a dodgeball game. We didn't get in a room and say like, hey, this is what we came together to make. um but when the founding team of Valence Studios got together like 5+ years ago, they did get in a room and they said, what kind of game do we want to make? And they knew that they wanted to make something that was innovative and that was unique and that nobody had ever seen anything quite like it before. There are a million battle royales out there. There are a million first person shooters and everything. And so that idea of throwing and catching a ball is really where it started, more than dodgeball. And dodgeball is an easy progression from that, hey, if you're throwing a ball back and forth, how do you turn that into a game? Dodgeball is a great way to do it. But dodgeball was never the initial drive for the team as much as doing something unique, as throwing and catching a ball, and as just trying to make something that was welcoming and inclusive to everybody. So there was some time before we even knew that it was going to be dodgeball, even after we had the base mechanics. Like there was a world. It was very early on and we moved away from it pretty quickly, but like we almost made this like sci-fi themed, where it was like, hey, you had this like avatar that was playing this sport, that you were like connected to in some way. This was before my time, so I don't know all the details, but like that was an option. I know that they explored like fantasy in some way, and it wasn't until we said like, no, we just need we need there to be a place where dodgeball is just pervasive in throughout their culture, throughout everything that they do, where everything is about dodgeball, where this is how people settle their differences. This is how people, it's just a way of life to them. And so that was not there at the beginning, but it's how the game kind of evolved and what we settled on. And that was the first time that it ever felt really right on like, okay, this is working for us. Let's dig in, let's explore this area.
I mean, I think it's great that you guys did like take the time, like experimenting through like fantasy and sci-fi, and then eventually came down to be just straight up dodgeball, which actually I think is also great since your main focus, target focus is like scholastic esports. Since like I don't know, as a kid, my favorite game to play in gym was like dodgeball, and hey, now I can play it on a Nintendo Switch or play against other people. So it's a great way to connect with kids, especially for kids who want to start getting into like esports and stuff like that. Can you tell me what the next project is for Valence Studios?
So I can't because we haven't announced it yet. But it is something that is similarly different. Like we don't want to be that studio where it's like, okay, we have one franchise, let's make a new sequel next year, let's make another sequel the year after. Like we want to always be challenging ourselves and doing something different. There are tons of game studios out there that lean into franchises, and those work really well. Like there's some that are really successful and really fun, but I think the reason that the team at Velan has come together is because we want to keep working on reinventing and reimagining what it means to make a new kind of game. And so, we have some announcements that we're going to be making at some point in the not too distant future. So just keep an eye out. But yeah, there's exciting stuff on the horizon for us.
I was really hoping for the announcement, but
you had to try.
I don't know if you have like a gaming console with you right now, but I have my Switch with me. I was wondering if you wanted to play a game.
Yeah, let's do it.
Rockles, play. I don't know how it is for like PlayStation, but like whenever I hit Y and I rush into someone, they like drop it, and that's just always funny. There's sometimes when all right, okay. Here, I'll rush over to you. Here you go. Hello. Alright. I'll rush in first. What the? How in the world? You just like hit me in the face with a ball. It's like he punched me, right? You're telling me I'm like dying every few seconds. This is like skill-based like playing though, right? It was great talking to you, Josh, and I'll see you later. Well, we got destroyed. Every single game we played, we lost tremendously. Even though this game makes me want to rage quit and punch open this computer screen, I will say this, it is still nonetheless a ton of fun. It is cross-platform and it is free, so it is accessible to anyone at any time at all. So hop on with your friends and start throwing balls at each other.